Hello and welcome to another episode of Authentically You. Before we get started today, if you have been tuning in, welcome back. And if it's your first time joining me, just welcome. We're glad you're here. And if you can give this video a like and subscribe, it would help continue showing us that real stories and real people are important and real life and real goodness is valued. And we're all about that. So that would be awesome. If you don't know, I am Anna, also known as the Black Pants Girl, because legitimately that's all I wear. And the person that I'm going to talk to today could probably verify that. She has been somebody that I have known has it been almost like 15 to 20 years at this point? Holy
15
mackerel.
days. Yeah.
Where does that time go? I'm just glad that she has agreed to do this. She is one of the people that has always been an inspiration to me. She is extremely knowledgeable about a lot of things, including she's a pop culture junkie as well, and I appreciate that about her. But beyond that, she has actually gone into a field that I was involved with as well, and I think she's doing an amazing job with it. So tonight, I'm going to be introducing you to another amazing person living their own truth. So let's connect as I introduce you to tonight's guest, Allison Douglas. Hello, Miss Douglas.
Hello.
Or Mrs. Douglas. How are you today?
Doing really good.
That's awesome. You said you were feeling a little froggy in the throat situation. I think you sound sensational.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I took a lot of Dayquil.
Well, that's good. Dayquil is a wonderful thing. Actually, I still love my NyQuil. I want to try that honey flavored NyQuil because I just don't think it's really going to cut the mustard, but that's
As opposed to the classic green flavor.
green flavor, green death. Yes, the green death flavor. Well, I'm very honored for you to meet with us today, and basically, feel free to talk about whatever you want to talk about today. This is what this is about. Let's get started from where we always get started in this conversation. Where does the story of you begin? Where are you from originally, for people who don't know who you are at all?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I am from Roanoke, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I grew up and lived until I graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Tennessee to go to Christian college in West Tennessee. And then after that, I've lived all over the East Coast. So I've lived in Chicago, Atlanta,
Oh, wow.
Tampa. I think that's about it recently, and Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been here, my husband and I have been here about probably 16 or 17 years
Yeah.
now, which feels like forever.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. You don't think about it until you start calculating how long you've been someplace, and you're like, wow, where did all of that time go? And
Yeah.
my mom used to say to me all the time, she's like, well, you better enjoy it now because it's going to go really fast when you're blah, blah, blah age. And I was like, oh, yeah, right now.
When my kids were really young and super, just like I wasn't sleeping well and
Right.
they were everywhere, my friend and mentor Janetta said the days are long but the years are fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that sounds stupid. And she was right. Like the
Yeah.
days are so freaking long and some of them just feel like they last forever.
Mm-hmm.
But then I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, we have come a really long way.
Yeah. And I think it's nice to have that perspective. And like you said, when someone in your life that you value their opinion and who's been through it a little bit more tells you something, it's almost like I don't know how, like, when you're with an older member of your family and you want to tap them on the hand, you're like, oh, right, dear, that's right, sure, I'm sure that's what you mean. And you're like, you dismiss it, and then you have that epiphany at some point where they're like, wow, they were like so on target.
Yeah, when my grandmother turned maybe 80,
Mm-hmm.
I asked her, like, how does it feel to be 80?
Right.
And she said, oh, it's the same. I feel like I'm 16. I just look different.
Right.
And I did not understand that at all. And now I'm like,
It's so
oh,
real.
yeah, I mean, I'm basically the same person with a hell of a lot more life experience
Mm-hmm.
as I was when I was 16. Like,
Yeah,
I'm still there. Um,
exactly.
yeah, so I guess it'll be like that when I'm 80.
And it's funny because I always thought I would be, I don't know. I thought I would be at a different place mentally at 46, but no, I still like my, music videos and all the
Yeah,
other crap that I still liked. And like you said, I have more life experience now.
right. But I still laugh at fart jokes.
That's reality, and that's, I don't know. I think that keeps us, I don't know. I think that keeps us who we are.
I
That's just,
definitely have the humor of a 12-year-old boy, much to the chagrin of my husband,
well, that's
who's
okay.
like, "Are you really gonna laugh at the license plate from Cobb County again?"
Yes, I
Yes, I'm
am.
going to every
Yeah,
time.
every time. That's, hey, there's nothing wrong with it. You can't let a good thing like that go. That's vitally important.
And
So,
life is hard, so you have to get your laughs where you can.
oh my gosh, you're not kidding. You're not kidding at all. So, having moved around a little bit, do you think that shaped who you are now, or do you, I mean, especially because I've known you and I have known you as, I mean, to be honest, I don't mean this in any derogatory way, but as a badass, because I think you're a badass chick, and you kind of march to the beat of your own drum, which I've always truly valued about you, because you're like, you know what, I'm going to do what makes sense to me, and it may not make sense to other people, but that's okay, because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to live for other people. I'm here to live for myself and my family.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so, well, thanks for saying I'm a badass. I like that.
Yeah.
I guess moving a lot for me was almost traumatic
Oh
in a
wow.
way. It was hard, but
Mhm.
I think that it helped to clarify that, like, I can do what I want to do.
Right.
There's like, it got tested, right?
Mhm.
So just trying things in new cities, not knowing anyone,
Right.
because I grew up in the same place, and I grew up in a really not sheltered, like, my family is lovely,
Mhm.
but I grew up in a really fairly strict and dogmatic religious community. And so there was never anywhere that you could be that people didn't know who you are and what you
Right.
should be doing.
Right.
um, so I guess, like, having a little freedom away from that and going, oh, I can be or do anything I want in
Mhm.
these places was really challenging,
Mhm.
but also showed me, yeah, you can do this. Like,
Right.
it can be done.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's not like, I think all of us, we have a little bit of that no matter where we've grown up. It's usually just you kind of fit into that family structure, and there's those unspoken rules and ways of living, and that you're supposed to kind of just be. And then the minute you get away, you struggle with the reality that, like, I know I want to do A, B, and C, but it feels like I'm doing something
Yeah.
I shouldn't be doing. But it really, at the end of the day, what does it matter? So, very interesting. So, I know the chosen path that you're walking right now as a person and a professional. Um, but for those who don't know, tell us a little about what you do, who you are.
Yes. Oh, I'm happy to do that. Um, well, so my husband and I got married when, oh God, I was a baby. I was 23. Um, and he has a really fun and cool and right now unstable job
Oh, right.
because he works in the movie exhibition industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had done a lot of work with film festivals,
Mm-hmm.
and independent film. And so we had enjoyed very much like going to film festivals, doing events, being part of even production. I really loved that. I worked in some film festivals. And so we had decided really early on that that was our path. And that's what we were going to do together. We weren't going to have kids.
Right.
And that felt fine to, I was good with that. And, but I was a teacher, so I liked children. I was a Montessori teacher. I had a Montessori 3 to 6 credential. So that's the early childhood credential.
Right.
And really enjoyed that work, but did not want to come home and do that work.
Right.
And so when we lived in Florida, there was a story about a little girl who had disappeared from foster care. And her name was Aurelia Wilson. I'll never forget that. For some reason, that just touched me. Like there was something about the idea that this kid not only just wasn't living with their family of origin, but also just disappeared.
Right.
And like she was just gone. Really bothered me. It like planted this little seed. So when my husband and I moved to Knoxville, I was looking for teaching jobs. He was doing his work, and we had just purchased our first house. And it was a 2-bedroom house. And so we had our like empty bedroom there. And every time we would pass it, I would be like, I wonder if this could be used in some way that just felt better than having it empty and full of boxes. And one night we were having dinner. My husband's a redhead, saw this redheaded baby, as cute as can be. So I went over, I'm like playing with the baby, and the family said, yeah, this is our foster daughter. And I was like, oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And so they started talking about the need for foster parents in Knoxville and Knox County, particularly because it was kind of the early days of the opioid problems in Appalachia. Now it's like everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's all these babies that really need a place to be because they're born dependent on drugs.
Right.
And again, like that seed had been planted from when we lived in Florida. Foster care is not anything I'd ever thought about really, but just something about these like chance encounters just started feeling vital that I look at it. So I said, well, what do you do if you want to become a foster parent? And they're like, oh, you call Ben Harper. And I was like, Ben Harper is a musician. Right. So, days later, I literally probably would have forgotten about all of it if his name had been Joe Smith, right? You call Joe Smith. But I was like, well, now I know you call Ben Harper. That's how you become a foster parent.
Exactly.
So I did.
Songs to you and everything.
Yeah, it was like all these little things that just stood out that kept coming back. And I was like, I guess I'll just try this. So we became foster parents. Our real goal was to get kids back home because that's what's best for them.
Right.
It's what's right in every sense. However, the reality is sometimes that can't happen.
Right.
And so we ended up adopting our very first placement, who came to us as a single kid, but then later their sibling came into custody. So it was 2 kids.
Right.
So we adopted 2 kids.
Yep.
And so I'm like, well, I didn't want any kids, but now I have 2 kids. And they're super and great. So I was like, yeah, this is fine. But I kept saying yes to short-term placements after that.
Right.
Which just meant that I got to meet more great kids. So we adopted 4 kids.
Yeah.
And we still live in that 2-bedroom house that we bought.
Yeah.
So now we have 4 kids.
Yep.
Only 3 of them are currently living here because our oldest is a young adult,
Yes.
very young
Yeah.
person who feels they are an adult, which all 19-year-olds do.
You were there once.
So yeah, now they range from 19 to 10.
Wow.
And so being a foster parent, just having that experience
Mm-hmm.
really put me on my professional path.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know what I was doing at all, right? So just like somebody brings you these kids and drops them off.
Right.
I thought I was really well prepared because of my background in teaching and education.
Right.
But what I learned is that when kids go through these just scary and sometimes dangerous and violent experiences that many kids have before they're placed in foster care, that it really changes sort of how their brains develop, how they grow. It changes them like spiritually and physically, behaviorally, I mean, in all these ways, which now seems like, well, of course, duh, right?
But when you're trying to put those puzzle pieces together.
Yes. And also that since I'd mentioned opioids, like there was at that time really no research on what happens to these kids as they grow. So that teacher brain in me was like, people need to know this. It's not right to drop kids off in their homes and then not give them the information that they need.
Right.
So I really just began pursuing the Department of Children's Services and saying, I really think I could teach these classes that you require in a way that somebody else who's never done this job could not. Like, I really think it would be better. And they just kept telling me no for a really long time. But finally they hired me as sort of an assistant, as a co-trainer to a professional, right? Professional.
Right.
Meaning someone who had a social work degree but had never done the work.
Right.
So I did that for years. And along the way, I really just began digging in. Particularly to early trauma and brain development and that connection. And then found a job at a really cool agency that I still work for, Harmony Family Center, where now I am trained as a phase 2, so I can train other trainers.
Oh, wow.
In the neurosequential model of therapeutics. I'm not a therapist, but I can train therapists. And I'm glad I'm not a therapist, although occasionally I'm like, I could pursue that work, but I really actually like telling other people how to do it and not doing it every day. And also in the neurosequential model of education, which is just another way to look at education from a brain-based perspective. So that's kind of how I got here. Now I actually am only I think I have 3 more semesters. I'm about 3 semesters away from getting my master's degree in early childhood programs.
That's awesome.
And in the last week, I just got notification that I was accepted into the Infant Parent Mental Health Fellowship at UC Davis.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Thank you. Yes, wow. I haven't really told many people about that because I wanted to make sure, everything's good. But they sent me a bill. So I think that feels pretty final.
Unfortunately, that means everything's good.
So they sent me my my tab.
Yeah,
so
that's really a good indicator.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to just diving in with other working professionals,
right?
In the field of infant mental health, which I told someone about this the other day, and they literally said, "I didn't know infants had mental health."
They do. Think of all of the traumatic experiences that happen to a infant who is doesn't have language skills or doesn't have the ability to be able to contextualize exactly what they're experiencing, but they know it doesn't feel good, or they know it doesn't.
They're scared, right? They have that
Yes.
sensitized stress response system from constant toxic stressors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really cool, and it really is a field that's just becoming more and more widely known,
Yeah.
and understood because of the changes in the growth in neuro psychology, and understanding that, you know, so much of our brain development occurs really early,
Yes.
and that it impacts us for the rest of our lives. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we are unable to change our brains or how they work or how we think, because that would be, well, that's probably, I just wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if I thought it couldn't change.
Right.
The idea
Absolutely.
is it gives you more efficient and effective ways to change when we understand how the brain works. So I am now a just full on neuro nerd,
Good for you.
and really enjoying that. And then I get to practice when I come home, because talk to people about how to be a effective and efficient brain-wise parent all day.
Yeah.
So I come home and get to practice what I preach.
Right.
Sometimes not that well.
That's
but
life.
getting better every day.
Yeah. No, and that's part of, I think the thing that's the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around when we discuss any kind of psychological or social work sort of theories or models or different pathways to try to understand what someone's experience is or what they're going through. It's still such a relatively new science, to understand how people react, interact, how they develop things. Like, I think we take for granted that it's so young that we're still understanding it. Like, we're still finding the ways to make sense of these experiences that kids have or even adults have. And trauma is such a huge part of what shapes us as people. I mean, it not just neural pathways and coping strategies and survival skills or whatever that you have put into your life to just deal with that trauma at that time that you carry with you. It kind of can hardwire in earlier stages that now we have to figure out a different way to deal with those things.
Absolutely. And I think that's so interesting to put it that way. I remember years ago just happening to watch something like Dr. Phil, one of those type of shows, and he was talking about how women with fibromyalgia often have a history of sexual abuse or physical abuse. And the way that he was spinning that, right, is that then that what that meant was that fibromyalgia was not legitimate.
Right.
It was some sort of projection or some way of describing symptoms from these women. Well, number one, it's mostly women, right? So that they're crazy, basically, and that their bodies don't really hurt, that it's their minds. So now, after all, and that always stuck in there because I was like, that's crazy to me. That makes me so angry. He also in that same talked about how women with trauma pasts are overweight, and so what that means is like they need to change their thinking. And so I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. It always made me feel so angry and like pushing back against that. And now, after years of, 5 years of spent training with Dr. Bruce Perry, is learning that like the point was true. Like, yes, those things are correlated, but his extrapolation that what that meant is somehow this is a psychological projection was totally wrong. That what happens when you're abused in those early years, as you well know,
Mm-hmm.
from your own background and training,
Yeah.
it impacts the way your organs work, right? It impacts
Yep.
your dopamine receptors. It
Yep.
impacts how quickly your cells turn over. It makes your
Mm-hmm.
telomeres shorter. Like your cells actually have a shorter lifespan,
All true.
the more trauma that you have. So it's like these extrapolations that people have used to make traumatized people feel bad about themselves
Right.
are so off base, when the truth is we can use that information to say, this happened to you and this is where you are,
Mm-hmm.
and here's how you can get better,
Right.
if you are ready and want to get better,
Right.
right? And that
Right.
you don't have to get better right now, today. There's still a
Mm-mm.
lifetime ahead of you, right?
Yes.
Particularly during Corona, I feel like there's been a lot of victim blaming of like, you need to just get over it. We've
Yeah.
all got to pull ourselves up and get back to work. This is the
Right.
new normal. And I'm
Right.
like, well, it's not that simple for everyone.
No, it
For some
isn't.
people, they just are not going to be able to do that today.
Mm-hmm.
So what resources and supports can we put in place so they can do it tomorrow? So
Yeah.
I think that research is just so beautiful when we can extrapolate the idea that, yes, this changed you, but it doesn't mean you're a broken garbage pile. It
Right.
actually means here are the best tools to get back.
Exactly. And honestly, what I think the beauty of what psychology was intended to be as it has grown. I mean, if you think back to where it began, I mean, thankfully we're not trephining people any longer and putting holes in their skull to release evil spirits. And thankfully, we've moved past just psychoanalysis as the end all be all of how you approach things, because I don't ever think that I've had penis envy, but maybe I have, whatever. But the reality of it is that, it from its roots, they were basically just kind of grasping at trying to understand where all of these things that were manifesting in people were coming from, or where they were related to. Um, demons in your brain is one path. When you don't have a whole lot of science to back anything up, it sounds logical at that time. Um, from a male's perspective, women who have a tendency, which isn't, I say a tendency, but because it's not true of every woman, it's not true of every man either, to be more emotional, thinking that hysteria was a female affliction, and you deal with it because they're sexually repressed. So that was one way of thinking of it. Another way of thinking of it was it the leaps and bounds that we have made as a science, I think, is what unfortunately keeps a lot of funding for mental health programs from being fully realized to be actually taken care of, because it is still young and there's still so much that we're figuring out and learning. I think that unless there's a global pandemic, which honestly we've been dealing with, trauma and PTSD or whatever you've been dealing with for ages, we should be actively looking for solutions, helpful problem solving skills, all of those things to help with that as well. But we know a medical model. That's what we know. So we're going to put all our money into that because it makes sense to us. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it makes pharmaceutical companies money too.
Sure.
So and I'm not saying that I take medications on a daily basis. They help me. That is a part of it. I get that. The reality of it is, though, is that I think we have to think outside of the box and learn all of the different parts of how this gets to where it is, and then dissect it and how do you fix it.
One of the things that I love about Dr. Perry is Are you familiar with Bruce Perry's work?
No, although I'm going to go look him up.
He's so great. So Dr. Perry wrote this book called The Boy Who's Raised as a Dog. And
I have heard of him. Okay, I've heard of this story. Yes. Okay.
yeah, so that book is just like his, I think it's actually called, like the subtitle is A Therapist's Notebook, Working with Kids, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he just talks a lot about his experiences early in his career as a child psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he starts talking about the neurosequential model,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing he does is put up a slide that says, this is called Box's aphorism, which is all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Right.
And I'm like, that feels good to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That feels right to me.
Mm-hmm.
In 25 years, we're going to be like, yeah, Dr. Perry's model was wrong.
Right.
We'll have more data, we'll have more technology, we'll have more research.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it won't be exactly right, but is it useful?
Yeah.
Right? Is it useful? Is it hurting? As long as it's not hurting people and
Mm-hmm.
it's healing people, is it useful? Sure.
Absolutely.
And so that model is all about looking at people holistically,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not just at the medication piece,
Right.
not just at going even to CBT for 1 hour a week.
Right.
Right? He said Dr. Perry said one of the things that he first questioned as a young therapist was, why do we do 50 minutes of therapy once a week?
Right.
Like, why do we do that? What is the reason for that?
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't this be done better in a different way?
Right.
Basically, he was told, well, that's just what we do.
It's true.
Right?
It's right. Mm-hmm.
So he's like, well, particularly for kids, they're growing and changing so much. Really, 50 minutes of therapy once a week is not going to be enough to make sustainable
Mm-hmm.
changes in
Yeah.
the way that they're growing. And so he's like, kids have to have a fully therapeutic environment. Like everything has to be working toward
Mm-hmm.
making that kid feel safe, making them feel understood and heard,
Mm-hmm.
and healing. And so that is really what I do in my work, is talk about how do you create a therapeutic environment,
Right.
not just send your kid to therapy once a week.
Right. Where unfortunately,
not how it works.
yeah, no, and I think a lot of us have confronted within our own families, within I, as a therapist, having worked with families, the parents realizing, I've discovered when the aha moment for them happens when they realize it's the environment as well that needs to adjust or change. It's not just thinking that I'm going to send my kid here, they'll be fixed, and then they come back into this environment and everything's going to be perfect. Well, no, the environment unfortunately has either reinforced some of those behaviors, or it has, just the conditions in that environment have to adjust as well. It's not just that person or that child. It's definitely a multi kind of systemic kind of way of looking at change, which you and I know from doing the work, we've seen that. That's vitally important, especially for a child who doesn't have the ability to decide everything.
My own children the most were not things that were done to them or for them. They were like me, learning a better way.
Right.
They were me parenting in a new way, or examining my expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such, parenting in general is tough, right? I mean, it's just hard, and it's just to me, it just showed me all of my flaws. It's like everything that I thought I was like, I have this under control. Parenting just amplified that, like,
Right.
no, you don't. So here's the things you need to work on.
Right.
And then my kids needed to do their own work, right,
Yeah.
for themselves. And that work was not cognitive. I mean, like, a 10-year-old who's misbehaving isn't thinking
Right.
with their cortex. I can't wait to make my parents pissed off at me today.
Right. No, I don't think that even enters into the equation, to be honest. They're like,
Just getting that understanding and putting it into place was such a big shift for me.
yeah.
As a person and as a parent. And I think that it's what made our family sustainable,
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard. It's just hard. And we're parenting in a new way that no other generation has parented, like with all the technology, trying to figure out what does that do, what is safe, what is mentally appropriate. So
there's a lot more different challenges.
Yes. Yeah. My parents were not worried that I was meeting pedophiles when I was shooting ducks and duck hunting.
Yeah.
But now when my kids are playing a game, I'm like, are there people chatting with you? What is this?
Right. Yeah. And that's real. Like, honestly, you hit the nail right on the head. Like, it's funny because you'll have people who will say things like, well, kids just need to, go and experience life and learn how to make the right choices. Well, okay, that was easier when it was pretty straightforward what you were going to run into or what you were going to be dealing with. Now you've got what you think of as a normal video game. It is a more interactive video game, and there's people in there, and you don't know who those people are. You never met those people. How do you vet them? You can't vet them. You're, as a parent, you're like, I'm hoping my kids will be
modeling,
honest.
right? Yeah. And just the modeling of that. I mean, like, my sister met her husband on the internet. Mm-hmm. How is she going to tell her teenager, like, you shouldn't be meeting people on the internet, right? Like,
you're like, well,
there is these, like, vast areas of gray.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, my 12-year-old son is, like, obsessed right now with the elections.
Yeah.
And he's literally, like, downloaded the CNN app onto his tablet.
Oh, wow.
And I had to be like, buddy, it's okay. Like, it's okay to go play basketball. You don't have to watch this all day. But then I glanced over and there's my husband who's watching, election results on his phone while he's also typing on the laptop. So again, that whole, like, amplification of, like, what we do, that we're like, hey, they shouldn't do that. But I mean, is that who we are and what we're doing? I mean, I can't remember who said it. It may have been Young, but was like, if you want to change anything in the kid, first change it in the adult.
True story.
Right.
It's real.
That's, to me, like, what I've taken away from this whole experience, besides just having a family, which is is like, being the person that I would want kids to be, my kids to be, but anyone's kids to be. Is really not just telling them, really being that person. If I'm telling them the world isn't on your phone, you need to go play, but yet I can't wait 30 seconds in a line without pulling out my phone.
Right.
What does that mean?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And
trying to live in that.
Yeah, and as you know, and as I know, and as almost every parent who watches this will know, the stuff that you say versus the stuff that you do with a child is, I'm not saying that those things that are said don't matter. They do. There are things that we will carry with us as well that happen. But a lot of it is what the parent has done, or just ways of coping. And I see it even in myself, different things that I do now that I realize are just things that my mom and I did together because it was how we coped with this, or we did, and it's funny. It's very, very interesting when you think about it. And it brings me to you've kind of mentioned that you've had a couple of aha moments along the way to decide to take this path with your life. But it sounds like it's been a bunch of aha moments within a journey. Like you didn't necessarily have one light bulb moment where you were like, yes, this is exactly what I'm going to do with my life. It's just been kind of a series of, oh, huh, very interesting. Let me actually go down this path and see where it takes me.
Yeah.
And I admire you for pushing through whatever fears or apprehensions you had every time you had that little aha moment. Because even though it's nice to have this new bit of information or this new challenge and it excites you for a little bit, it also is scary to think about, well, if I'm going to go down this path, what does that really look like? What is that going to mean for my life, my family, my relationships? How much is going to be impacted if I take this path? And
Yeah.
if you there's so many of us who don't start that journey because we're so afraid of those changes that you don't. It takes courage to do the work. It takes courage to pick up on those moments and say, I want to know more, and I'm going to dig deep into this and find out what I want to know. Not just as an education perspective, but actually deciding to do it in your personal life. It's not just a talk the talk, it's walk the walk kind of life. And I'm sure that when you were getting into this, it made sense. I mean, you had the heart to want to do that to begin with, but it just it probably enriched your understanding of the stuff you were learning a lot more by having these experiences of raising children who had trauma in their lives, to be able to put the puzzle pieces together and also relate it to parents who are in that process as well. The thing is you can tell when you have had somebody who knows the knowledge but doesn't have the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I don't discredit those who have the knowledge,
sure.
but perspective goes a long way. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak to parents in a way that's different. I mean, Dr. Perry certainly knows far more about neuroscience than me. He knows all of this stuff inside and out, right? But he's not raised a kid that came to live with him after being abused for 5 years.
right.
And, so he's not done that piece of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I do have a point of view that is really valuable.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt too that just I have that kindergarten teacher way of looking at everything where I'm like, you can explain anything to anybody.
Right.
Like you can explain everything to a kid in kindergarten. So if that works for kindergartners, it certainly can work for adults too.
Right.
So I do find it not simple, but natural to explain really complex topics in a way that I feel like almost anyone can understand.
Yeah.
So that's I just love being a parent educator and working with families and parents. Because talk about scary. I mean, I've been in lots of places where I felt scared, hopeless, didn't know what I should do with my own self and family. And I mean, we've had hard times with our family and our kids. And so I can say to other people, like, I have been exactly where you are.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't have a lot of huge aha moments, but there are so many moments where it's like, this door was open at just this time. And I think my husband, John, once said to me, like, the way I make decisions is I look for open doors.
Right.
And when I see open doors and it feels right, that's when I do it.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm often looking for those little openings
Mm-hmm.
that can become bigger things. I mean, the job that I have now was not a job, like it was not something advertised. They
Right.
created the job for me
Yeah.
because I was like, I want to do this thing. And I just was kind of out there saying it while I was doing other jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I was invited to speak at a conference about my experience as a foster parent. And I
Mm-hmm.
just got up there and was like really talking about my experience and how hard it was and how unprepared I was.
Right.
And I really called some people out, probably in a place that I shouldn't have, because I was like, I didn't know this stuff and people need to know it. Like they
Right.
need to know it. And so at that time, the CEO of my company just came over to me and said, I want you to work for me. That's
Wow.
how I got my job.
That's awesome.
So it literally was like just saying yes, finding these little open doors,
Mm-hmm.
because you just don't know what it will lead to. Like,
Right.
sure, I'll come and speak at a conference.
Mm-hmm.
It's not getting anything from it, except I got my whole career from it.
Right.
So
So
yeah, it's finding those little doors.
yeah, and I think that that's vitally important to remind people that sometimes life is going to present you with some things that maybe you hadn't considered. And if I have this overwhelming feeling inside of me that if it gnaws at you or sticks with you and you have this, it's not something you can easily dismiss, then that's probably a direction that you need to go in.
Absolutely. And the opposite is also true. When I was teaching, I remember really clearly applying for this job. I got an interview. I went to the school.
Mhm.
And when I left, I was like, this feels too good to be true. I did not have a good feeling about it.
Right.
But I was really young. I was, like 25 or 26. And I was like,
Mhm.
I got to have a job. I just got to work. So I took the job and it was hell on earth. I hated every minute of it. It was awful
Right.
because it was too good to be true. It
Right.
wasn't. And so it's like, if you feel called to it, if you have that feeling, I think you should do it.
Mhm.
At the same time, if you're like, this feels wrong,
Right.
it's wrong. It's
Yeah.
wrong.
I get it.
And it's hard. I mean, I say that from a bit of a place of privilege to go like, if the job feels wrong, don't take it. I mean, sometimes
Right.
you just gotta eat.
Yeah, I
But
get
I think
that.
when you're like planning for the long term,
Mhm.
just knowing that like this does not feel right
Right.
is that you just gotta listen to that. It's
I
really
agree.
important.
I think a lot of us don't tune into our, I hate to say it, but our gut. When
Yeah.
your gut is telling you something, it usually 9 out of 10 times is on track with just what you need to listen to. And I think a lot of us dismiss it.
Yeah, I do not dismiss that now. I mean, if it doesn't feel right,
Yeah.
even with sort of like mundane things, like I've taken my kids to a doctor and I was like, no. And they didn't do anything. They
Right.
didn't say anything. I was like, this doesn't feel
Feel
right.
right. Yeah.
And it's hard to stand up for yourself
It
in that way.
is.
And I remember really clearly, I texted a friend, this was years ago, and I was like, I just literally said, I'm sorry, but I will not see that doctor again. It just doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Because they kept asking me, like, what was it? And I was like, I don't know. But I was so proud of myself. I was like,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel right, and I'm not going to do it.
No, and it's funny.
And it
yeah.
turned out that lots of other people felt the same way.
Right.
Something wasn't right.
Exactly. And that's the hardest thing for me to try to explain to people who are even pursuing possibly using counseling or any kind of therapeutic modality to try to help themselves. I'm always like, it has to be a right fit. That
Yes.
therapist has to be a good fit for you. Like, if you feel you can be authentic with that person and literally like dig in your own dirt with that person, that's the right person. But if you're going in there trying to sort of polish up your story because you want to impress them or something, you're not doing what you need to get through this. You're just repackaging. You can dress a broken window up, make it look pretty, but the window's still broken.
Yeah.
That's just where we're at. So is there anything that you are currently working on other than your amazing trajectory with your education, which I'm so excited to hear about? Is there something that fills you with a sense of accomplishment, either professionally or personally, that you just sit back and think to yourself, good job. I'm good with this.
Yeah, I'm so many of the trainings that I've done, I feel like have been helpful. When I get a card or just an email from someone saying I'd never thought about it that way,
Right.
that really does. But there was one specific, my dog just sneezed. There was one specific email that I got, and it was, so part of what I'm doing, right, is saying, you can do this, you've got this, to parents who are in tough situations. And while I do share what's happening, in some really broad terms in my own life with people, particularly now that my kids are like teenagers and tweens, it's their story, like their life is their story, and I'm not going to just go around telling everyone in the world about it.
Right.
But what was unknown was that I was in a super scary mental health crisis with one of my children. And I actually left the hospital where they were staying for crisis management and went and did a webinar for my work. And, of course, my adrenaline was like off the chart.
Sure.
And I was just, but I got through it. And the next day I got an email that said, like, I had been really angry at my child and thought that they were doing this to me.
Right.
And hearing what you were saying about like safety and having this building safety in the home, that even though I may be providing food, shelter, and clothing, that psychological safety is something different.
Yeah.
It's made me reassess the way that I want to work with my kid.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do forever. Yeah, I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you don't know how much that made me feel like this is not in vain. Right. And that building psychological safety for my own kids means sitting with them at the hospital if that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so just seeing kind of that parallel of like, yes, this is the right track for me.
Yeah.
Was a big moment.
No, and I think I think as people who work in our field or any field where you're trying so hard to help families, people, children evolve past whatever hand they've been dealt in life at this point, I think it's kind of like getting the card for your perfect, like like you've been playing this hand of cards forever, and then you finally get someone turns over the right card, and you're like, aha, this is where it's at. This is what they get it from a different place than they came in with, and that's where real change can happen. You know what I mean? It's having that. It's also seeing other people have those aha moments where something just connects and they think about it and they go, I never thought of it that way. And now I want to approach it from a different place because I hadn't considered that place before. And that's where the beauty is. And that's why I get it. It is not the easiest field in this world, but it is a field where when you see change happen or when you see growth happen, it's the people doing that work. It's you planting seeds, like you said. It's you I always told people I feel like therapy is kind of like when you go bowling and they put the little bumper lanes up.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like we just need you to. We're going to get you down to the. We want you to get to a strike eventually. That's where we're aiming for. But I'm going to keep you from going into the gutter. Is really what I'm going to do. But you're still throwing the ball. Like you're still
I
having to
totally
figure.
feel like that analogy. I'm going to be using that in a lot of classes now. That's really good.
Well, and it's true. It's like I mean, because people always assume that. And it's funny because a lot of people will ditch therapy because they don't realize how much it is their own work. It's you doing the work, and it's funny because people go, well, why couldn't you be my therapist? And I said, because I'm going to tell you how I feel about a situation. When I'm your therapist, I'm more concerned about how you feel about the situation.
Right.
And they're
Right.
like, huh? I was like, just don't worry about it. It's fine. I'm going to tell you how I feel. You're my friend, so I'm going to basically say, here's what I think, which is so different from what you would do as a therapist. But that's if you understand what
And I
that
also
is.
love therapy. Like, I go to therapy
Yeah,
weekly. It's
yeah,
so important, I think, to just have the support,
it
just to be
is.
human.
Yes, and it's funny
Just
because
to
a
be,
lot of people always have criticized because I'll say, yeah, I'm a therapist, but I also go to therapy, and they're like, oh, is it because you're wacky? And I'm like, yeah, I am. Thanks for noticing.
for
Um,
people.
I was like, not only do I hear so much from other people's lives and what they've been through that I have to now kind of just put in some place in my world, I have my own stuff. Like, and you and I both know there are going to be times in your life where somebody or your child or something is going to remind you that you're not done working on a particular thing from your
Every day.
life. Oh yeah, you're like, oh, thought I handled that. No, hadn't. No, that's not done. I'm not done dealing with that yet. So, and I think that that's just part of that journey. If you given where you are now, have the opportunity to go back in time and visit your younger self, if you had the chance, would you say something to your younger self or give yourself advice? Um, and I ask this always because sometimes we need to hear that even now at this point in our journey.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself?
I would just say let go.
Yeah.
Like, let go of the control. I'm a fun-loving control addict, right? So when I tell people like I'm really a control freak, they're always surprised
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, "But you just seem to have so much fun." I was like, "Right, because that's who I want to be."
Right.
But inside, I'm like holding on for dear life. I have this sign in my office that says "Relax, nothing's under control."
Right.
But one day it fell down and all the letters popped off, and like I had to fit it. And I was like, Allison, that's why you have the sign.
Right.
Like, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. So I just tell myself to let go, that it's all gonna be okay.
Yeah. And it is. Well, are you ready for your 10 quick fire question closer tonight?
Yes.
All right. Well, those of us who like film and acting and all that jazz probably recognize the 10 questions I'm about to talk you through from James Lipton's Inside the Actors Studio. I just always loved this as a finisher. I just think it's a neat little quick fire round. Originally, it's from Bernard Pivot, um, from a French program where he used to do interviews, and this is how he would always end them as well. So I always tell the people that I talk to, just go with your gut and what initially comes to mind, and just enjoy it. The only thing I have to do is try not to react a ton to what you say, because I will go on tangents, and that's a whole other story. So, without further ado, the 10 questions. What's your favorite word?
Clarity.
What's your least favorite word?
No.
Yeah, I'm not fond of that either. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
competence. I love watching people that are really good at what they do their thing.
Yeah, I get
It's
that.
exciting. Yeah.
What turns you off?
Um, Arrogance.
Yeah. My favorite one. What's your favorite curse word?
Shit fire.
That's a new one. I hadn't heard that. That's
All right. When I was growing up, I lived with I stayed with my grandparents during the summers.
uh-huh.
And my sweet little Southern Belle Grandma Ruth, when she'd get really mad, she'd say, well, shit fire, Bill.
I love it. That's so
Wonderful.
great. Oh, what sound or noise do you love?
My kid's laughing.
Mm, it's a great sound. What sound or noise do you hate?
Uh, YouTube videos of people playing video games and they just like scream incessantly. So like my happiest sound is my kids. My worst sound is also something that my kids have. So yeah.
I get you. I get that. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Ooh, I think I'd like to be a comedian.
Yeah, I could see
Yeah.
that.
Or a TV writer.
Both of those are good. That's hey, comedians write their own material typically.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. What profession would you never want to attempt?
Never once. Like a pilot where you're responsible for all these people's lives and you have to like deal with a big machine. No.
I get that. I do. That makes
You
sense.
cannot have a bad day at work when you're a pilot.
No, a bad day a bad day at work is a news story at the end of the day. Yeah, for sure. And lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I told you you'd be fine.
Ah. And you'd be like, thanks for believing in me. Yeah. It's like that old adage where they were like, I know God thinks I'm strong, but I wish he would just let up for a little bit, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. Well, my dear, thank you so much for joining us today and shedding light on another different way of looking at helping people and a helping profession that isn't talked about all that much, because unless you're in it or dealing with it or you're exposed to the system per se, you don't know that it exists. And I think that the more that people are aware of it, the more people can engage and explore it as an option for their lives. And I just want to thank you for taking time with me today.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you had a good time. And this has been another amazing episode. And thank you for tweaking the therapist in me to actually talk my game a little bit, because rarely do I ever talk about it anymore. I worry about what chew sticks I'm getting my dogs at this point. So it's nice to be able to talk shop. And I just want you to realize that the work you're doing is, number one, super vitally important, not just for your own family, but for all of the people who are helping other children out there who are trying to shift the narrative of their own family of origin. Um, that's I can't say enough about the type of work that you do, and I want you to realize that people see you and
Thank
value
you.
what
That's so
you do.
nice.
Yeah, well, God, it's easy to say. So so I hope that anybody who's watched this has, if you have any questions or thoughts about it, Allison's given me a couple of links that I can send to, and I'll put up the at the end of the video, that you can actually explore these things a little bit more in depth if this is something that is speaking to you. And at the end of the day, thank you, Allison, for joining me today.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
absolutely. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Authentically You. Bye. And that's it.
Cool.
That's all.